My parents called off my 18th birthday to make my sister happy, so I moved in with my grandpa. After that, he stopped giving them money for good. Hello, I just turned 18 a few days ago, but unfortunately, my spoiled older sister insisted that my party be canceled at the last minute. So, my parents canceled it. I was relieved that she wasn't even supposed to be here for the celebration, but just my luck, severe Midwest storms caused every flight to be canceled on the day she was set to leave. 3 days before my birthday, she was supposed to fly to NYC with some friends, but now the trip has been delayed. She's been upset about it, and my parents have been tiptoeing around her because they want to avoid making her angrier. She's the golden child of the family, and they wouldn't dare cross her, so much so that she demanded my birthday be canceled early on, because in her word, if I don't get to have fun, neither do you. Without a second thought, my parents sent a message to every guest, telling them it was canceled. I was waiting excitedly for all the guests to arrive, but no one showed up. It wasn't until I asked my parents why that they told me they had called it off without even asking. They claimed my sister was too upset, and it would be insensitive to have a party while she was like this. At that point, I lost it and yelled at my parents. This wasn't fair. My sister had always been given different treatment, and I had to sacrifice my needs for her. This crossed a line. My sister was upset about a trip canceled for reasons no one could control, and my parents had ruined the party family without even to make matters worse, my parents had discreetly informed every guest ill, and that I was They claimed I had a severe migraine and that using my phone was the last thing, instructing everyone not to text me. As a result, no one messaged me, leaving me completely in the dark until the very last moment. When my parents finally told me what had happened, I immediately started arguing with them. I was beyond furious. It wasn't my decision to cancel, and they had no right to lie. I shouted at them, but their only concern was that I was being too loud, as they feared my sister would wake up from her nap. I kept yelling, not caring in the slightest. My sister eventually came downstairs and started defending them, saying our parents hadn't done anything wrong. According to her, it would have been cruel to celebrate while she was in such distress. She even went as far as to call me entitled and spoiled for not understanding. Her smugness, after everything she'd caused, pushed me over the edge, and I started cursing at her in a blind rage. Things escalated quickly, and I grabbed her hair, trying to shake some sense into her. Our parents had to pull us apart, and in the chaos, we missed the doorbell ringing. After we finally stopped fighting, my parents opened the door to find my grandfather standing there. Everyone in the family, especially my parents, holds my paternal grandfather in high regard. He's the true authority figure, and his presence at the door was the last thing my parents wanted. As soon as he stepped inside, he demanded to know why there was so much shouting and swearing. Since I had been the loudest, he turned to me first. Usually I wouldn't tell people how my parents treated me. It always felt too petty to share. But this time, I had nothing to lose, so I told my grandpa everything. I explained how hurt and angry I was, and made it clear that covering up the truth would only allow the mistreatment to continue. It was time to stand up for myself, and I did. I also told him that this wasn't an isolated incident. I'd been dealing with my sister's entitlement for the past 18 years, and the favoritism toward her wasn't new at all. But this incident was the final straw. I couldn't take it anymore. My grandfather's face showed clear shock as I spoke. Within seconds, he erupted at my father, harshly reprimanding him. That's when I learned several things I hadn't known before. For the past few years, my grandpa had been financially supporting my parents, giving them money every month to help keep their struggling business afloat and maintain the family. It turns out my grandfather had been the one keeping us going all along, even paying for the party that my parents were trying to take credit for. He expressed his deep disappointment in my parents, scolding them for treating me so poorly. He pointed out that my behavior clearly reflected how their favoritism towards my sister had traumatized me. As always, my sister, clueless as ever, tried to argue with him, but my parents stayed silent, letting him speak. She claimed that the main reason she wanted the party canceled was because she was devastated about her canceled trip to New York, a trip she'd been looking forward to for months. She called me heartless for wanting to celebrate while she was suffering, but my grandpa wasn't having any of her nonsense. He bluntly called her out for her entitlement, reminding her that she'd had my 18th birthday canceled just to suit her emotions. He firmly told her that the world didn't revolve around her, and I think this must have been news to her. My sister's attempt to argue with him only made him angrier, and finally, he he turned to my parents and told them he would no longer be providing them with financial support. From that moment on, they were on their own. Then, he turned to me and said that if I wanted to leave, I could pack up and move in with him, as it was clear that my parents would always prioritize my sister over me. The only thing my parents seemed upset about, even as my grandpa said this, was losing his financial backing. They didn't care that he was offering to take me in. They were only worried about the money. This only confirmed what my grandpa had said. They didn't care about me at all. Without wasting a second, I made my decision. As my parents tried to bargain with my grandpa to keep his financial help, I went upstairs. I quickly packed my things and returned downstairs with my grandpa, who barely glanced back at them one last time before we left. As we drove to his house, my grandfather apologized for everything I had endured. He said he should have intervened much sooner. Although I'm not entirely sure what he meant by that, I'm just relieved to be living with him now. Clearly, the only ones unhappy with this new arrangement are my parents. They've been trying relentlessly to contact me. While I haven't blocked them yet, I've also not been answering their calls or responding to their messages. Still, I've been reading their attempts to reach out. My parents keep texting, apologizing, and admitting they were thoughtless. They confessed they had always favored my sister because they viewed her as more sensitive and emotionally fragile. They now regret this, realizing they neglected me in the process. They claimed they overlooked me because they believed I was strong enough to handle it. Frankly, my sister is nearly 5 years older than me, and she should have been the one mature enough to share our parents' attention. I didn't believe a word from my parents. It was clear they only acted remorseful because they wanted me to return and convince Grandpa to continue his financial support. All I wanted was one genuine apology from them, but it never came. Their relentless excuses started to infuriate me. So, this morning, I finally told my father to stop sending me messages. I stated plainly that I didn't need their insincere apologies. I knew they were only trying to maintain Grandpa's support. I was done dealing with them. When they canceled my birthday without even consulting me, they clearly showed me where their priorities were. That was the breaking point for me. I had decided I would never return. Instead of offering an apology, my dad replied, claiming he and my mom had wronged me, but were ready to make amends and do whatever necessary. I seized the opportunity to lay down my terms. I would only consider returning and discussing their situation if and only if my sister would no longer be living at home when I came back. They made a mistake by declaring they would do anything. My sister is 23 and has been working for 2 years. By now, she should have saved enough to move out. So, I don't think I'm being unreasonable, though my parents see me as heartless and foolish. Now, Ada, for telling my parents that only if my sister moves out will I consider moving back in with them. You see, my parents have always prioritized her needs over mine. These small instances added up, even if they seemed insignificant. Regrettably, I never thought it was substantial enough to discuss with other relatives. Even if I had, I doubt it would have been seen as justification for someone to intervene or suggest that I move out. I kept silent about it to avoid further angering my parents. Regarding my grandfather, as I've mentioned, he's a formidable figure. Every family member loves and respects him. He was a prominent lawyer in his prime, winning many difficult cases. Not only is he wealthy, but he also leads a very disciplined and morally upright life. Clearly, everyone in the family looks up to him. I could have told him about my parents' treatment, but until last year, he was preoccupied with caring for my grandmother, who was in her final days. He was busy, and I didn't want to burden him with my minor issues while he was dealing with so much. After my grandmother passed, he was grieving, so I didn't think it was the right time to bring it up. I'm grateful now that he's willing to support me. Our bond has always been strong, so it's not surprising that he's offered to let me stay with him until I start college. He's even promised to cover all my college expenses until I begin working. First update. Hello. So I've decided to stick to the condition I set for my parents. Truthfully, even if they ask my sister to leave, I have no plans to move back in with them. I just want to see if they actually do it. This will show whether they truly want me back or if they value my sister more than my grandfather's financial support. I haven't mentioned this to him, but to be fair, I've only recently uncovered some secrets he'd kept from me. So I think it's reasonable. I'm referring to the fact that my grandpa always knew my parents didn't genuinely want me, but had never done anything about it. I never understood why my parents favored my sister, especially since she didn't exhibit any qualities that would justify their partiality. My grandfather recently revealed that my parents initially planned to have just one child. However, 5 years after my sister was born, my mother unexpectedly became pregnant with me. They considered terminating the pregnancy, but my father mistakenly informed my mother's parents. My maternal grandparents argued that it would be wrong to reject such a blessing if my parents were fortunate to have another child. Thus, they convinced my parents to continue the pregnancy. Tragically, when my mother was 8 months pregnant, my maternal grandparents died in a severe car accident. Both succumbed to their injuries after weeks of fighting for their lives. My mother was devastated. During her grief, she suffered a mental breakdown, irrationally blaming me for bringing bad luck. She was briefly institutionalized. Upon her return, she seemed somewhat better. Nonetheless, my parents secretly regretted letting the pregnancy proceed. They planned to have me adopted after my birth, but then my paternal grandparents stepped in. They vehemently opposed the adoption, telling my parents it was madness. Reluctantly, my parents raised me. When I confronted my grandfather about his cryptic comment upon taking me in, he disclosed all this. Now I understand what he meant by saying he should have acted sooner. And yes, he absolutely should have. With this truth now clear, I know I'll never return to my parents, understanding fully why they treated me differently. My current stance towards them is completely justified. They resented me for years over something beyond my control. At least I have a legitimate reason for my actions. They are at fault. Although I'm frustrated with my grandpa for not being upfront sooner, I recognize these topics are tough to discuss, especially with a young child. Currently, he is the only person I truly trust, so I try not to hold my frustrations against him. Yet I couldn't help feeling uneasy when I saw my sister waiting outside my school today. I asked one of my male friends, a football player who was quite robust, to walk me home. I felt safer knowing he would be there in case she tried anything. We've been friends for a long time, and he knows everything about my family situation. He willingly agreed to accompany me home. My sister followed us silently, which really started to unsettle me. Halfway home, I confronted her, asking what she was trying to do. She refused to speak in front of my friend, claiming he was a stranger. But I bluntly told her I didn't want to talk to her at all. She then started accusing me of being the cause of our parents' anxiety and unhappiness. She claimed that they had warned her yesterday that unless she moved out, I wouldn't return home or speak to my grandfather about assisting them again. She said she thought I was being unfair, so she had come to confront me. I retorted that if I couldn't be happy, neither could she. It was ridiculous for her to think I would engage in a serious conversation with her, especially since she used the same logic to cancel my birthday party. Therefore, I told her the same reasoning applied to her situation. She erupted, calling me horrible names. As I turned to leave, I just kept walking with my friend and ignored her. My dismissal seemed to infuriate her even more because moments later, she attacked me, and I found myself on the ground. I could feel her weight on top of me and the added pressure of my backpack. Thankfully, my friend was there to help. He quickly pulled her off me with minimal effort. As I got back to my feet and dusted myself off, I realized just how necessary it was to have him there, given my sister's volatile nature. Her belief that she could attack me and get away with it infuriated me. In response, I confronted her, delivered a stern slap, and warned her that I would call the police if she tried anything like that again. I was certain our parents would not appreciate any further disruptions given all the chaos she had already caused. Despite her arrogance, after the slap, she didn't try to fight anymore. My friend and I walked away, and she didn't follow. When I got home, I told my grandfather everything. He was ready to call the police, but I convinced him it wasn't necessary. I dismissed her actions as those of a loser who had learned her lesson. Besides, she was already in hot water with our parents. When I finally told my grandfather about the conditions I had set for my parents, I expected him to be upset. Instead, he laughed with me, finding it clever and thinking my parents deserved a taste of their own medicine. That was the end of that. Although I was a bit sore from being thrown to the ground, I felt a sense of relief knowing I had finally stood up to my sister. She had it coming for a long time, and it felt just hope that this incident will make my sister and parents think for bother. Update 3. Hey, it's been almost a month since I moved out. I'll only be with my grandfather for a few more months as I start college in September. School is officially over now. I graduated from high school a few days ago. The football player friend I mentioned earlier was my date to the prom. Indeed, many of you guessed it. And I wanted to share this happy update before getting into what happened next with my sister and parents. 2 days after my confrontation with my sister, I received a letter from my parents. They had decided on their course of action. Claiming I had always been envious and spiteful, they chose to let my sister stay, believing I was not the type of person they wanted influencing her. My mother's older brother decided to invest in and partner with the company, so they no longer needed financial support and consequently no longer wanted me around. They admitted that their only reason for wanting me back was to continue receiving financial aid from my grandfather. While I had suspected their true motives from the beginning, this revelation didn't particularly affect me. I'm pretty sure they thought this news would hurt me. I didn't even bother responding to their message. A few hours later, they sent another message threatening to block me because they considered me a disgusting human being, echoing my sister's earlier claims. It seems this truth irritated them. They labeled me as violent and unappreciative, pointing to the incident where I slapped my sister as proof of my aggression. Of course, they overlooked the fact that she had attacked me first, pushing me to the ground. Likely, my sister hadn't told them the full story, so they probably didn't know. They also called me unappreciative, criticizing me for acting as if they were neglectful parents, despite raising me, feeding me, sending me to school, and clothing me. I find it bizarre when parents tout these basic responsibilities as extraordinary during arguments. Providing the essentials is the least they could do, yet it seems my parents consider these basic acts as over and above efforts, expecting me to treat them like heroes for it. In any case, I wanted to reply but decided against it as it would only be a waste of time. Instead, I blocked them first, ensuring I was done with them before they could cut me off. Life with my grandpa is going quite well, and so far, most of the colleges I applied to have accepted me. As promised, my grandpa will cover all my expenses. I'm still waiting to hear back from some of the top choice. Living together has been an adjustment, and sometimes I do feel angry at him for not taking me away from my parents sooner.